Welcome to the podcast. I'm Tinson.
I'm Sharang.
I'm Tristan.
And we're trying something out tonight. We're out here at McMaster University on a park bench, and we're going to be talking about the 1996 movie Before Sunrise, featuring Ethan Hawke and friends.
And friends.
I feel like that's like almost slightly sexist right now. All of us don't remember the one female.
I don't think it's. I just
it's
think
probably not. But
Ethan Hawke's just much more of a famous celebrity.
Like why? No,
than
directed by Richard Linklater
and co-starring Julie Delpy.
There you go.
Julie Delpy.
Do we want to give a quick sort of overview of this movie, or are we just going to assume some sort of knowledge on the part of the listener?
Well, we recommend that you go and watch this film if you haven't yet. It's a brilliant piece of cinema.
Brilliant.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yep.
Would anybody like to give a summary?
I can do my best. I just sort of watched the movie. So Ethan Hawke plays Jesse, and he meets Celine on this train to Vienna, and she's a student, and basically they sort of spend a single romantic passionate night, that's maybe not the best way of phrasing it, in Vienna, and they sort of fall in love, and then they leave.
It was really just like a long conversation.
It's a conversation.
It's sort of a conversation between two people
with little intrusions here and there. And interesting that I want to talk about. You called it passionate, because I get like.
Well, yeah, I suppose. Yeah. I think it's passionate. It's not passionate in the sense of like wild or like rowdy, but it is at times maybe. But it's passionate in terms of sort of strong feelings, I think. That you're gesturing at.
I was gesturing at the fact that the mic's over here and we only have one of them.
Right.
And while I admire your, I guess romantic look off into D-back.
For the viewer,
look behind me, perhaps.
For the viewer, Tristan was looking off very romantically. That's the right word.
I suppose if they were the viewer, they would already know that.
No,
love that. Yeah.
Before recording, I talked to you both separately. You called the beginning stilted.
Just the dialogue.
And you called it unnatural, which I think is very
interesting.
What's the word?
Contradictory?
Yeah,
dichotomy.
There we go.
Dichotomous?
Dichotomous. It was very dichotomous, and I don't know, because
yeah, that's what I'm curious. Like, how do you feel it's why do you feel it's tilted?
Well, it's sort of awkward, and the delivery. Maybe it's something about the sound production. Oftentimes they'll be kind of distant, and the audio is just like close audio, but just quieter. There's a scene on the train in particular when they're sort of panning away and he's reading the menu, and it's kind of a strange audio effect. But I think, I don't know, it initially feels awkward in a way that movie dialogue, we're maybe not used to feeling awkward. Movie dialogue is very sort of smooth, and the characters kind of bang out their lines as if they know exactly what they're going to say. But there are definitely awkward aspects in this movie that are a little jarring at first. But
they're very intentional awkward moments, because it's like, it feels sort of improv-y, but like you can tell that it's very careful, very meticulous, very scripted.
Particularly where they meet the two actors in the play. And he says,
bring me the horn of Wellington's cow.
Exactly, I think that's the one. And he says, do you speak German for a change? And the guy goes, and Jesse goes, no, and he goes, oh, it was a joke. But he says it was a joke in a very, as if he's referencing the fact that it's a joke in the script. He says it almost in a way where that's not his line, but he's like, he wants to make it clear that he's not as the actor saying that, like the character is saying, oh, well, it was a joke,
That's actually interesting, like looking at the meta framing or something. I don't know enough about film for that, but I think the dialogue-wise, what you're talking about, like stilted awkwardness, for me, that's why I feel it is natural. Because it is, it's stilted,
it's awkward
in
a kind of human way. Yeah.
Right, it just, and that's one thing. I feel like this movie is very, like, I always have trouble putting it into words, but it feels very human. Like, I get the feeling that these are two real people talking to each other more than I do in most films I think I view.
I think, yeah. Well, I think part of it is that maybe it initially feels wrong or fake. Once again, I have to talk towards the microphone because there is this sort of almost, I guess, hyper reality of Hollywood movies that they kind of have a set of conditions all to their own that we expect to see in them, and when we don't see them, even if it's truer to reality, maybe it's a bit unsettling,
jarring.
Yeah.
I'd fully agree with that. I think that's one of the reasons it felt so much more like, I don't know, the word you used this word earlier, I think, genuine.
Genuine, yeah.
Genuine, and that is 100%. Like, this film feels very genuine. Now, what do you think about it?
Well, I'm just upset that they didn't actually show "Bring Me the Horns of Wellington's Cow."
I would have loved to see.
I would have loved to see it. The first time I watched it with my English class, and we were cheering these like two German dudes on.
Yeah,
and we're like, "Yo, bring the cow." I don't know.
Are you gonna have to censor that out?
I'm not sure.
Oh wait, yeah.
Here, wait. We'll do a pause, and I'll say beep. And then you can cut that over.
And that's still be in there in the end cut. So we'll... Audience, this is full transparency. You see the process.
I can just like censor it. Like just
but then I'll have said beep for nothing.
But I was really upset, and like we were cheering these two guys on. And like by the end of the film, I don't know, like someone just shouted out, "We didn't see the cow." But like they did a really good job of, I guess, presenting a sort of awkwardness that you don't see in most scripts.
Yeah.
And like again, it is like this could be a real conversation that happened that was just like really well edited, like a documentary style thing. Because like in real time, they would have probably had something like 12 hours to have an hour and a half movie of conversation. So like this really could be a highlight reel of this couple's conversation in another universe.
No, that's fair. I mean, what I'm curious about, what do you guys think that sense of like that genuineness, the realness of it like adds to? Like, how does that work for the film?
I think it sort of speaks to it being less of a kind of a romance film in inverted commas and more of a film that presents a romance. It's not a sort of genre work, and because it doesn't necessarily try to reproduce all these romance tropes, but it just kind of portrays a story between two people that is romantic.
So it's not a romance film, but it is about romance.
That is the exact opposite of what you said earlier. I think you said at some point, because I was talking about how I find it so romantic. You're like, I think it's a romance film. It's a romantic film, but it's not. I don't feel it as romantic. Maybe I miss.
No, I was on the same page. Like I think it's in the genre, or I guess it's not like they are not particularly romantic, and they don't focus on that. They do focus on like the romance of the conversation, and like I was thinking, like this movie, it might not have worked as well, but like I think it could have been pulled off if it was just like two people meeting as friends and having like sort of the same conversation.
Yeah,
I really think that like it would work, but it wouldn't work as like a romance. I think also like it's interesting because the movie, in some ways, like little bits we were talking about, it's kind of cynical. Like when they see like they get the poem from the random poet in Vienna and everything. Best described, but at the same time, it's not even framed. Like I was watching it, it's not really framed in a particularly romantic way. The camera doesn't like. Half the time the scenes.
That's what I mean. It's not a sort of pastiche of romance. It's just a kind of it is romantic insofar as it is those two people. I'm not sure quite how to express that. I don't watch a lot of romantic movies, so I don't have a wide-ranging frame of reference for how this interacts with the ways that movies typically present romance when the focus of the movie is romance, but
because I like my rom-coms and everything quite a lot.
Okay.
What really pushes this movie towards, because I would say this is the most authentic feeling romance I've seen outside of I'm just cliche, like when Harry met Sally. Both of them have a very similar aspect, and it comes back to like that idea of chemistry, but also just because I think they don't try to like fluff up the romance in any sense. It is a very, I think, the sense of reality. Like the camera does feel just very sorry there, like real. Like they don't do anything special particularly with the framing or anything as far as I can tell. Like out there's probably lots of intricacies.
If anything, they keep in a lot of like the trash and like the grime of Vienna in the film.
Right.
Yeah, it's a real city that is inhabited by real people. And I think the other thing is that it's a romance, and it's a definite fantasy, you know. It is a very much a fantasy scenario. You meet someone and you have this kind of one night compressed romance.
That's just
and then I mean, you kind of
just to be clear, we are 3 single dudes talking about a romance movie, but
that's true.
Does that make this happier or sadder?
Exactly. Yeah. How does that inform our perspective on like fantasies of romance? Fantasy is a sort of negatively loaded term.
Oh yeah.
But it's the point being.
I do think fantasy is a good term for this.
You think
though.
so?
Like, I can't think of a better. But yeah, sorry.
The point being that it's not an idealized. It's not a perfect fantasy. I mean, it kind of. They're I think well-rounded characters probably.
Yeah, they do it. Like that's the thing. That's why I find it weird. The weird like sort of contrast between the cynicism. I think is too strong a word, but just the really down-to-earthness of it and the romanticized and idealistic feeling of just the setting of the characters. Like the fact that they get along as well as they do. The very concept of two people.
I think you have to downplay it. Like it was 2 characters that were so polar in their way of thinking, but so like harmonious in their like way of interacting with each other, because like Jesse was very cynical, like
that's true,
in his approach. Oh, like that poet probably is just mad libsing all his poems, and the palm reader isn't gonna tell you that your every day is gonna be the same for the rest of your life,
right?
Like I think, but like what works between the characters?
That's the thing. I find it really hard to place ideas in this movie because it just... Okay, also I think it's a sense of movie, like in their conversation, in their chemistry, in their dialogue. In a way, it sucks me in so much, it's hard to look at it from that analytic distance point of view. I have trouble.
Move from talking about the movie generally into talking about the characters specifically? I mean, you were kind of talking about how Jesse... sees the world in a certain way, and Celine has a kind of differing viewpoint. And I mean, I think, I don't know. I mean, I do think they're well-developed characters, and so I don't know. What do you think of? I'm not sure how to sort of put forward this question, but how do you think the genuine aspects of the characters create a more genuine romance?
I mean, the movie does spend a lot of time, first thing, like exploring their histories. Exploring both of their lives, past lives, and their, I guess, future plans. But there's a big focus on them, because a big part of the movie is they're strangers. I do think that's why the fact that they're strangers matters a lot. No, but you're talking about if they're strangers met and became friends.
Right.
Okay, so then but I do think like the fact they're strangers, because it allows this sort of insight into them exploring each other's lives. And through, like, I think there's a reality imbued in from first, like, just understanding how they came to where they are, and their self, like, it's interesting because it's not an objective point of view, it's their self-rationalization, their self-image of how they came to where they are.
It's not quite a conversation you would have with someone you knew for a while.
Yeah.
Well, someone maybe you had known for a long time.
Long time.
I think there is a definite similarity in the way we interact with people who we've known for a very long time and are very familiar with, and maybe I should reframe this from me to, or we as a general public to me specifically, but would interact with somebody who you've known for a very, very long time and somebody who you don't know at all and will probably not see again. I mean, I think that's our sort of comfort around people. It's kind of like an upside down bell curve, you know, you sort of are very comfortable around people who are total strangers because they're almost kind of not people. And we do see that in the movie. They do become a little bit more, as they kind of get to know each other, they become a little bit less willing to take those kind of bizarre risks. And by the end, you know, we see that kind of they're unwilling to say to each other, like, well, we would actually like to see each other again. Whereas at the beginning, he's willing to say, like, will you get off this train with me? Which is so...
But is that something that happens with most people, or is that just like one of the lesser believable elements of the film?
That's fair. I do think it's lesser believable. I do think also like there's a point to that idea of like the fact that it is, because I mean I didn't, when I watched the movie, go like, this is bullshit.
Beep.
I don't know if you have to censor that either. Like, I was like, cool. I think it's because of that idea of them, like, they really lean on the idea that they are strangers and that's what makes it comfortable. So I do think it's believable in a cinematic context, I guess, is how I put it.
Which is all it really has to be, because it's a movie.
I'm not gonna lie. I want that movie to be reality. Like, I had dreams about that happening, but also the idea is you can't recreate that either, because that makes it artificial. Like, that's the other thing. It's like it's genuine in the spontaneity of it.
I mean, what if you went to Vienna and you met I don't know, like an American dude or a French girl, and you gather that they didn't watch this movie and you try to have the same experience. You know, actually quite interesting. You cannot have that experience outside of the movie because I was reading the filming locations they used are like way too out of the way of each other.
Yeah. I think more to the point of not being able to have that experience is that the way we experience the movie, I mean, Jesse talks about how he's, you know, he does everything. He's never done anything that he hasn't done. So when he talks about, you know, when he goes bowling, it's always, you know, he's always going bowling with himself. He's always with himself. And part of the appeal of the movie is that it's sort of maybe not us. We're seeing... You know, we're allowed to, well, maybe part of the movie as a medium is that we're seeing somebody who's not us doing something, and we're allowed to escape from ourselves for a while. I mean, you might argue that we project ourselves onto that, but I think, you know, if you were doing it, you would be forced to contend with yourself in that way.
I guess that really characterizes him in the same way that he was talking about that 24-hour movie where you sort of
follow people's lives.
You follow other people's lives at the start of the film.
Right.
It's sort of like just a way to look into other, and I guess this is sort of a metaphor of the film itself, that you're looking at this sort of segment of these two people's, like, and I guess menial too. I mean, I don't know if menial is the right word, but
mundane.
Sort of mundane lives.
I think there is some menial activity that occurs, perhaps.
But, like, I think that's the interesting thing, because it's mundane, yet it's also fantastic, like a fantasy. Like, the movie has this weird, like, contradictory, like, element to it, where it is both just whatever, like, it's just normal everyday lives, but it's also just out there, like...
I think when a movie, like, sets itself to be sort of unbelievable, it has to compete with all the other movies that are out there that are, like, so much more incredibly unbelievable and so much more, like, fantastic and action-packed and exciting. Whereas this is, like, it does not have to, you know, play in the same ring as those, like, sort of, fantasy movies, because, like, this fantasy is something that you would compare to your own life, and it just has to be more, exciting or like more memorable than your 2 hours of your own life.
Like a grounded or a realistic fantasy, I guess. Like a more... That's interesting.
Yeah, it's a fantasy that you can find yourself believing, perhaps.
Also, a quick thing about the characters, I just realized. The other thing they talk about a lot is their future plans. Like, there's a big focus on how they... How do you think about the interaction of the two characters towards the end, especially when they think about their futures, also their intertwined futures?
Because I don't know if, and I know when he directed this, they didn't like plan on making a second and third movie, but they did, and I don't think they wrote it with the intention of sort of talking about, like, of sort of their paths coming together again. But, like, even it being a 2-hour movie, they still talk a lot about time, it seems. Like, one of the first things he says to her is, like, how in, 5 to 10 years or whatever, she's gonna be married, and she's gonna, like, think back about all her regrets, and think back about the one dude she met on the train, and, like, possibly, like, so she should explore that opinion. And, like,
if we could briefly, I think that reminds me of an interesting point maybe about the way the movie functions as a fantasy. If we could sort of return to that idea of, he says that in that way that the fact that she's experiencing it is better because it shows her that it's kind of not an idealistic scenario. So and when Celine talks about her grandmother who is in love with another man, and Jessie says, well, it was probably better that she never met that, really got to know that other man, because she would have found out that he was just as much of a sort of useless bum as the man she was actually married to. And I think in a way that's part of the way we interact with this movie, is we can never, it sort of can only ever exist as a fantasy, because if you have that experience, it will always be disappointing, as things in reality are. That's sort of cynical.
It does have to be, like, disappointing compared to an image, like an ideal you had for it. Like, if you did do it as spontaneously as they did, and I guess, like, that's part of the romanticism of it. If you just, like, went into it before you realize you're even doing this thing with no expectations, you'll, like, it can be a lot better than I guess, like, imagining what would happen if you start talking to this girl.
There's a psychoanalyst. Is it Karen? Anyway, her last name is Horney, Horney, and she describes neurosis as a process by which sort of spontaneity is inhibited, and people are always conceiving of things as kind of the ideal versions, and they produce an ideal self-image, and that to escape this neurosis is to sort of act spontaneously in that way. Moment, so I think this movie is in that maybe psychoanalytical sense about these characters escaping their sort of neuroses. I mean, we see a kind of typical neurosis at the beginning of the movie, these characters discussing their relation to their parents in a very kind of psychoanalytical way. She talks about going to the shrink, as she puts it, and she talks about her fear of dying. So it is kind of it is almost like it becomes a kind of therapy session for both of them.
I would fully agree with that, I think. Especially, because the idea of neurosis you talk about, the whole movie, at least the parts I can still remember well, they spend talking about these sort of ideals they have for all of these different ideas. Like, there are different concepts for their future, for, I forgot what, but it's like inane conversation about their ideal sense of things.
Their ideal sense of things.
Yeah, it's terribly vague.
No, I mean, sometimes you do have to be vague.
I don't remember the specific as much. They do spend time, like, also on other things. I remember a lot of when they hit on different topics, they talk about the way they think about it. Like, I don't know, I feel like it relates to the idea of neurosis. Maybe I'm pulling a bit there.
I think we can pull, again, if we're thinking about this in a psychoanalytic way, maybe, or if I am, I guess, more to the point, we can pull in that notion of, I mean, it's the kind of talking cure, as I think Freud said, that, it's these people who are talking about things they would never let themselves talk about, and the mechanisms they use to uninhibit what they're talking about. I mean, towards the end, they become familiar with each other and more reluctant to talk, perhaps, and then they do the phone sort of, it's almost like a bit where they are kind of like joking, but they use it as a way to kind of say these, to be honest with each other without having to be honest.
It's an interesting thing. A human barrier taken away by pretending to partake in a more distant form of communication.
Isn't that what film is anyway, right?
Like, it's crazy, because it's like, they know they're pretending. It's not like it's not like it's tricking them in any way.
Right.
They're
But the movie isn't tricking us into believing it's a real series of events. We are entering into this willing relation with the movie, where the movie says to us in some way, "I'm fake," and we go, "Okay, you're fake," and it still tells us truth, and we still receive that truth. It doesn't give us any facts, but it does tell us truth, I think.
Like a sincerity, like an intimacy through distance.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think is sort of mediation there.
That's a really interesting meta perspective on it.
And I guess when a movie can actually happen, that sort of truth becomes more useful than when the plot becomes the plot is implausible.
Oh, it's and that does fit in with the idea of the film, because again, like the spontaneity makes it seem like sort of like we talked about, like time aspect, like a moment in time. It does feel like a frozen moment in time, like outside of cause and effect.
That's what they wanted it to be. Like they wanted to. I mean, I don't know. Like they obviously don't achieve this, but they wanted to preserve this moment only in their memories, never see each other again.
Do we have a way to go to commercial break and sort of like actually intentionally shift a topic?
Oh,
you know,
yes.
like on a sort of production perspective, like just because so that we're not rambling on, and we can if we want to talk about time,
we can always cut it.
Yeah, if we want to cut this bit out and put in like a I don't know, like an elaborate gag about a fake commercial. And then open up with like talking about time, because otherwise I think we're gonna ramble on with a little direction.
And with that comes a word from our sponsors.
Ladies and gentlemen, do you want to attract farmyard animals with your everyday jewelry? Now you can, simply by buying Minotaur bull earrings. Cut out the honk bit and just have the. I tried to do a Minotaur noise bit, but just cut it at Minotaur bull earrings.
Hello and welcome.
And we're back. What did you think of those commercials?
They were good. They were great. I'd love to hear them.
Wow. Did you see those objects?
Please make it easy later.
All right. So
those Minotaur bull earrings.
Cut that tape! Cut that tape! Put it in the blooper.
I can't believe this. Oh, that was short. Okay. So.
And we're back. What did you think of that commercial?
That is a break in time.
And speaking of time, we're going to move on to the way the movie plays with time and sort of freezes time, and I think one of you was saying something about that.
At least for the portion, until the very end of it, it feels like it's outside of cause or effect. It's just simple action. Mm-hmm. And that's I think the beauty of it, until it is at the end. And I feel like tainted's a strong word, but like, in some way blemished by the idea of they start worrying about the effect.
Yeah, they talk about their past, and obviously we don't see their past, and they talk about their future, but then it is kind of an upset when we realize that the future is actually going to happen in the movie. I mean, we don't see it, and I suppose in some sense it doesn't happen in the movie, although it does in the sequels.
Yes, sadly.
But yeah, it's definitely a sort of moment that they're suspended in, like as if, even though we can see the sun set and the sun rise, although we don't see the sun rise, but it does rise.
Because it happens before.
Mm-hmm.
That. Sorry.
It's indeed, that is the name of the movie, Before Sunrise. Although there is a portion that does occur
after sunrise. There is false advertising in this film, if you're particularly specific about your titles.
I would like my money back for this movie.
You could have like laughed before, and I think
I left my room with the movie playing.
But you left your room before they showed the sunrise, because honestly, I really did enjoy that last couple of shots of all the places they were.
That was really nice.
And they look so empty. I guess that's the point, but they look so wrong because they don't have the life of the moment.
We understand them sort of in being areas around these characters, but then...
And now they're just empty
Yeah,
settings.
and it is about that transience that is so important. I mean, one of the things that I was really struck by was when he talks about, like, in a way that relationships are special because they end. You know, and that notion of, like, having to address the fact that a relationship is going to end either in dissolution of the relationship or death of one or more parties. And how the fact that that occurs is, like, actually what makes the relationship good in a way. Or important. Maybe not good.
That also works in a nice meta way with the film, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And I do agree, because, should we mention the sequels here briefly, I guess? Is it okay to... There are sequels.
And we might talk about them another time.
Yes.
But
they happen in the future, basically. And I've only watched the sequel. I haven't watched the third in the trilogy, because I've always dreaded it. Because there's a sense of, like... It actually occupying that future space where you have the consequences. That terrifies me, because there is something so beautiful about just this moment.
Yeah, I think they sort of acknowledge that the product, the whole sequence of events of the movie is based on them doing a series of things that, you know, I mean, he says, like, he would, you know, he knows he would regret not asking her to leave the train with him, and it's all these things that they know they would regret not doing, and so the fear of not having learned that lesson about doing things you would regret not doing is maybe present in them, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. There's a couple knots in there that I think I missed.
There's a lot of negatives, but they want to know that in the future they'll be able to live without regret in that way.
No regrets. What do you think?
I'm thinking about the moment that they're sort of trying to capture, and how, because there's this one scene where they're visiting the graveyard, and Celine sees the grave of a 13-year-old child, and then or she remembers seeing the grave of a 13-year-old child,
and they do see it again.
10 years later.
Yeah.
But the child is still 13.
Definitely not a lot of joy in the death of a child.
Unless you're a very specific kind of person.
Yeah.
I hope none of our viewers are.
Our listeners.
Please don't be murderers.
This is a PSA against murder.
Yeah, don't commit murder, especially against children.
That is not rad.
But it will keep them young forever. Which is a sort of small mercy in a way.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh gosh.
Anyway, aside from the diversion regarding maintaining youth through murder,
I do see their attempt at capturing that moment also, especially, okay, maybe this is more in line with the future movies and more in line with the discussion for that, as an attempt to maintain a certain youth. Because I think youth generally does get tied to a feeling of spontaneity.
Yeah, well, and they do talk about the way their ages, or the way they see themselves in relation to age, like her as a kind of old lady on her deathbed, and him as this young boy, and who is still pretending to be an adult and hoping he'll figure it all out. And I don't know, that was interesting to me, because I've seen the second view, that view of being sort of young or feeling young, and struggling to figure it all out, expressed a lot by people older than me, this notion that you never sort of grow up.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I can't speak to that. I'm not really qualified. But I've never seen the idea that you already feel old and living your life as a memory expressed.
Oh, that's actually very fair. I think it's also interesting that she's the one who's seen as an old lady when she's also the more idealistic one. And him as the young boy is the more cynical person in that relationship, which seems almost contradictory to like the general conception of it.
I think they do a good job in the movie of not pigeonholing either character into cynical or sort of idealistic. I think there was very little, I mean, I sort of skimmed the opening of the Wikipedia page beforehand, and it does say that, you know, it sort of says he's a a romantic posing as a cynic, and she's kind of nominally a romantic. But I don't think. I think they're too well-rounded as characters to be solidly classified as cynical or romantic.
Maybe that's why they work together so well. Because there's a little bit of each of them in the other already.
Mm-hmm.
But I do agree, especially with that idea of, like, I have not met... I do think, actually, though, the only people I've met is my grandma, who genuinely says, I've lived enough, I'm cool now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's...
There's a certain sense. I do think at some point. But,
Can you really trust people that have lived long enough to say that they've lived long enough? Like, how long? Sorry, pardon?
I think what I'm saying is I don't trust old people.
Don't trust old people. Okay.
No, like, how long do you have to live to be an authority of
living? Or
well, they're only purporting to be an authority on their own lives, which I think is fair.
They are only living the one life.
That's true.
And they're not living your life.
This movie is very YOLO.
It is very YOLO. It is very much in that spirit of YOLO.
Why not?
You don't hear YOLO a lot anymore, do you? Really?
No, it's sad.
I mean, I think what happened was everyone that said YOLO as
their lives have been lived.
Lived out that one life to fruition.
YOLO'd off this mortal coil.
Actually, that's interesting. The you only live once thing, and the idea of them being in the moment. I do think we're talking about them like trying to. I forgot, someone said the word capturing the moment. I think that's where their fatal flaw, fatal issue lies, in the sense that they have this spontaneous moment in this sort of capsule, and then they try to capture it in this sort of capsule. They miss out on the final aspect of spontaneity in the sense that it happens, and you can't keep it.
They don't necessarily carry the spontaneity all the way through.
Yeah.
But what would that look like?
I think that would be the ultimate acceptance of the idea that they have at the beginning of they meet each other and they leave and they
would that take away from the film by making it unrealistic? I mean, what kind of person would be able to live their life totally spontaneously in that way, where they would be able to, both parties would be able to fully accept never seeing each other again after having such a sort of a connection in that way?
I do think the movie the way it is I don't think it should like an altered ending like that or anything.
No.
I do think that's the aspect of it that's the part that makes it so much more interesting, in the fact that they aren't fully spontaneous, and you see that in their ending, in their final failure, and that's what makes it really brings a lot of more humanity to them too. It is, I don't know, something about it makes it feel so much more real. That they attempt this idealistic capture, like the idealistic living of the moment, I think is the word I'd use. But in the end, they decide they want to capture it because they can't let it go.
It's a kind of Icarusian.
Icarusian.
I'm not sure if that's the correct sort of.
We'll consult the
particular word.
I think they the only reason they could be so open and so romantic and so the acted the way that they were was because they came into this with no expectations of what's going to happen. They had the ability to play it by ear, instead of sort of shoehorning in your your idea and ideals of what a relationship is supposed to be. They could experiment and, quite frankly, mess around in more ways than one with this idea of love.
Yeah.
I fully agree with that. I think that's the thing. They lose that thing, like that aspect you're talking about there. Towards the end, they lose the sense of allowing themselves the freedom of messing around and realize that on some level they want an idea, one of those ideals that they dismissed earlier, I think.
And in some ways they realize it's not really possible or even really healthy maybe to live your life in a totally spontaneous way, or to carry out your kind of interpersonal relationships totally spontaneously. I mean, they do have to talk about things and the way and what they're going to do moving forward, and all of that.
Could you interpret that maybe as a sense of an understanding of a greater adulthood?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think it's certainly not a coming of age movie in that way, but they don't.
Coming of age would be the wrong word.
Yeah, I think would be. But I think there's, in that ending, there's aspects of a coming of age in the sense of understanding a maturity in figuring out that this youthful moment, like in that very idea of trying to capture it, in that youthful moment being just that. Yeah. Or maybe I'm also more cynical.
I don't know. I don't know. It's a good question, I think. I think if it was an easy-to-answer question, the movie would have been kind of boring.
Yes.
If the movie only raised questions that could be answered like that. But I don't know.
Well,
we'll leave that one to the listeners at home.
I mean, as you guys know,
on a park bench.
all good things come to an end.
That's true.
Relationships and podcasts
And
alike.
so does this
This
podcast,
moment
yeah.
has finished.
Yeah.
Don't have any
The
expectations
sun
for the
has
future.
risen.
Wait.
It has not risen.
It has not risen.
It's pitch black. Like,
It is before sunrise.
It is before
it is
sunrise.
before sunrise. Oh my god! Is this the part where we end up? Wait.
We're gonna go make out in that field over there. Thank you for listening to this.
My two podcasting colleagues can. I think I will go home and let them do that.
Well, thank you for listening to this edition of the Vault Podcast. This unnamed
better title
series. We hope you'll tune in next week for the podcast to come. Peace.
Peace out.
Next week.